Coogs House. Jamal Shed landed in the perfect situation with the Toronto Raptors. As we're about to see in Summer League, let's break it down.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, the daily podcast all about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach. And whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater who came to stop by, thank you for making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. If you want to join the conversation but don't know what to say, tell us how you cut a sandwich. Do you cut it down horizontal, vertical, angles? Do you do little fancy triangles? How do you do it? Tell us in the comments down below. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And man, we got some fun stuff in that later. But today's episode is all about Jamal Shed, Houston Cougar legend, fitting with the Toronto Raptors. So much so that we're going to cross over with Sean Woodley of Locked On Raptors. So let's bring in Sean.
All right, we got ourselves a little crossover action here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Rarely do we see these crossovers between networks, but we're doing it here. It's the NBA, it's the College Channel, it's Locked On Raptors and Locked On Cougs here to talk all about Toronto Raptors, second-round pick, 45th overall, Jamal Shed, who Houston Cougars fans know extremely well. Raptors fans are in the process of getting to know with Summer League going on this week. And it is myself, Sean Woodley from Locked On Raptors, with Parker Ainsworth from Locked On Cougs. Parker, how's it going, man?
It's going well. I'm excited for Jamal. I'm excited to get to talk about Jamal. And like you said, I'm a very big NBA fan. I was a Houston Rockets fan, but I don't get to talk a lot of NBA basketball these days. So it's nice to get to talk to you about a little bit of crossover action here.
Yeah, man. So let's just kind of dive in. We're going to kind of free flow it here a little bit, go back and forth. You'll grill me a little bit. I'll grill you a little bit. But I want to just sort of start with a Jamal Shed 101, if you will. Raptors fans still getting to know him, of course. Their first looks at him in Summer League this week. And, you know, obviously plenty of watching highlights and things like that after the draft. And it feels like we got a pretty good feel for the type of guy he is. But you watched him for 4 years with Houston. You know him in a way that Raptors fans simply cannot at this point, with the lack of tape of him with the Raptors to get a handle on. And I'm sure people aren't going back and watching old Cougs games. If they are, hey, credit to them. That's great. But it's the summertime. People got their stuff to do. So let's just kind of get a rundown of what makes Jamal Shed, a great player, what made him a star and a legend of the Houston program, and what are the Toronto Raptors getting in the 6'1" point guard from Houston, who, again, won all kinds of accolades and awards during his 4 years playing for the Cougs.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Kelvin Sampson, the head coach of the Houston Cougars, has these like sayings and Kelvinisms he goes to, but he's very much talks about how do guys impact winning. He doesn't talk about like stats and points, and it's just what kinds of impacts they have on the game. And obviously, you mentioned the accolades. A lot of those accolades come on the defense side of the floor. We're still trying to find statistics to best measure, and he is all over the floor as far as impacting winning goes. He's taken on a different role kind of each year he was in college. So I'm not sure which role, and that's what I want to ask you later, is which role he's going to fill with the Raptors, but he's been the pass first point guard that covers the other team's best perimeter guy. He's been the leading scorer this year. He's been a rotational guy off the bench with a couple other pros like Quentin Grimes and Marcus Sasser. Like he's been in a bunch of different roles in his time in college. And then his last year, I should point out that he actually, because of the COVID year, could have come back and decided to go into the NBA draft.
Right.
While the getting's good. He had a bunch of pub last year in college basketball. I think that truthfully, it'll kind of be this, what are you getting out of Jamal Shed? It's kind of, what do you need out of him? He's got a lot of tools to him. He's one of the best defenders. I mean, he was the best defender in college basketball last year, Defensive Player of the Year nationally amongst a bunch of different outlets. And I feel like outside of, he's going to guard the other team's point guard. He's guarded guys up to 6'4", 6'5". He's guarded other, I mean, he's that. And then offensively, he's just kind of a jack of all trades. Sets up offense, attacks off the bounce. He's a bowling ball when he attacks off the bounce. He doesn't have a whole lot of the Iverson shiftiness and that kind of stuff. It is much more, and Locked On Cougs, I liken to sometimes the Houston just ran HB dive. If you remember from Madden, he just played and just poof, straight forward. That was all it was. But he's really good at that, and he's a fun guy to get to watch play. There's all these anecdotal stories you get in talking about a guy for years. If you go back to his high school days, you grew up outside of Austin, and he was at Pflugerville Connolly, a big Central Texas basketball program as a young high school player, and was like starting as a sophomore, like really well. And frankly, his like situation changed a little bit, and he had the option to go to Manor, where his family had to move, which is not the athletic powerhouse, or because of transfer rules, he could have stayed at Conley and not been affected, but I got to play this big powerhouse. He goes, no, if I'm going to live in Manor, I'm going to play with the people I live with, right? That's sure. And he took them to a state quarterfinal, like a program that is not reputable by any stretch. And Texas high school basketball is a pretty big deal. I know people think of Friday Night Lights in football, but he's just that kind of guy that's just going to take his situation and go with it. He had offers to other schools out of high school. He chose Houston because of the culture and Kelvin Sampson, but he could have gone to A&M, could have gone to a handful of other places. And then last but not least, and speaking of the guy's character, I'm sure you guys have seen it goes viral about twice a year where he's picking up trash.
Pickup story. Yes.
And so they lose in a tournament game, and it's a nail biter, bittersweet ending to the season. And assistant coach Kellen Sampson, actually Kelvin's son, kicks a trash can over, trash goes flying, just frustrated, emotionally expressive.
Who among us? Yeah.
Right. And he's drenched in sweat, having just played. And while everyone else has walked to the floor, and they're picking up trash off the ground for because no one else is going to do it if he doesn't. Right. Just the kind of presence of mind the guy has. And it goes viral about twice a year, and it's really great to see. He's a great guy to cover. Loved having him in Houston for 4 years. Obviously, kind of wish he was coming back for that fifth, but totally get making a few $1 million and playing in the NBA, right? Who wouldn't do that?
Absolutely. And you got that guaranteed deal from the Raptors too, with the new second round exception and all of that too. That is, seems like a big reason why he's on the Raptors, frankly, is, you rarely see guys get guaranteed in the middle of the second round like that. And so, pretty sweet to get yourself at minimum 3 years and $6.11 million under the new second round exception. So, a worthwhile decision, it seems, for Jamal Shed, even if there was, still some unfinished business, if you will, at Houston. I want to ask you, Parker, about just the sort of on-court, you mentioned the on-court winning stuff, right? The stuff he does to affect winning, the jack of all trades nature of the things he does. To sort of go to the point you were earlier making about what is he going to do with the Raptors? I do think that's probably going to evolve over the course of his time with the team. I think year one, I would imagine he's going to get a lot of G League run just to sort of get the reps at the wheel. That said, this team is pretty light on backup point guard play at the moment. I think right now you're looking at Shed no lower than third on the point guard depth chart, which is, maybe a concern if you're hoping the Raptors win a lot of games this season to have a rookie that high up. But, I also don't consider Davion Mitchell to be a point guard, and Bruce Brown maybe will masquerade a little bit in that position, but he's not really a point guard either. There's a real chance that by the season's end, Jamal Shed is just the backup point guard for this team. And I'm curious, what do you think he does on the floor that can kind of, play into that role of sort of the table setter, the organizer for second units? This Raptors team has not really had backup point guard play for years. It's just like a thing they've punted on outright in a couple of cases, and it's hurt them, right? Their second units have just not had a whole lot of juice. There's not been organization. They have found a little bit of success here and there with Scottie Barnes running the show. Immanuel Quickley is surely going to play with some second units this season, but it feels like if there is a hope on this roster for that sort of steady guy who can come in and run the second unit and make it very, very playable and perhaps win minutes, in the way maybe a young Fred VanVleet did for this team, Jamal Shed feels like the best likelihood guy on the roster to do that. What does he have in his tool bag that might be suited to that kind of role?
All right. Now, I love sports. You love sports. That's why you're here. We never want them to stop. In the summer, we get like the Olympics, and Jamal's in the summer league, and TBT is coming to Houston, all those kinds of things. But as the things start to wind down, we get to that doldrum time when it's like the WNBA in the MLB. And I'm telling you right now, you can spice things up in that doldrum with FanDuel. FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up any of the picks and bets I want at any time I'm in the mood. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. The Astros are surging. Pay attention to that AL West. Go check it out at FanDuel. Head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball.
What does he have in his tool bag that might be suited to that kind of role?
Well, and I chuckle when you say Fred VanVleet because Kellen Sampson, the assistant coach that knocked trash can over, tweeted out the other day a screenshot when he got drafted by the Raptors, a screenshot of a conversation he and Jamal had via text when Fred VanVleet got drafted. And the conversation was, you put up 1,000 shots a day, that's you. Right. And he is not the shooter Fred VanVleet is, but it is funny. There's this he's wearing 23 this year. Like there's this constant comparisons between the two because they're smaller point guards that made a big impact in college basketball. As far as what he doesn't set up the table for others, I think that his assist number is almost underscored or like under discussed, maybe is the better because while he did, finish up with over about 6.5 assists last season per game. Houston had one of the lowest number of possessions per game in the country. They play an incredibly slow pace. They're playing like 65-ish possessions a game, right? And when you factor in that he's also the team's leading scorer, getting 6.5 assists in not that many possessions, I think that's more impressive than people put it out to be. And I tried to make that case for him in Player of the Year kind of conversations that really fitting into Houston's style. He likes to get on the floor and run, but they played a methodical pace. They slowed things down. They played grinded out defense and forced you to turn it over. I think it probably hurt his stats in that way, right? He gave Texas 29, right? Texas had future pros on their team too, right? I just saw Max Davis play in the spring league, summertime basketball last night, right? Like the idea that these guys he had 13 points per game, but I think the thing when you look at 13 points per game leading the Houston Cougars is there were nights he had the 29 and nights where his job was not to do that, right? The 6.5 assists was pretty consistent. And then for a guy, with point guard play as much as anyone, for a guy that has the ball in their hands as much as he does, keeping it under or around 2 turnovers, I think is also impressive when you think about he's the lone point guard out there for 38 out of 40 minutes. And so I thought all those things were the kind of things that project to a pro point guard. I actually want to flip the table a little bit and ask you now, because you mentioned the light point guard load you got up there. I really kind of saw this once it happened. I was a little surprised when it happened. I didn't know Toronto was interested in Jamal. It makes a lot of sense after the fact. But I see him as, he can score, but other point guard options for Toronto look like to me are scorers, right? I think of Quickley as a scorer. Maybe I'm wrong there. But I certainly think of Scottie Barnes as a multi-tooled perimeter player that can kind of do a lot of things. I don't am I wrong in saying that you don't really have a true traditional pass, and maybe that's just gone by the wayside in the NBA anyway, but a true traditional point guard like that?
Yeah, I think they have visions for Quickley being that, and I think the latter part of last season where he was averaging, he was putting up 6, 7, 8, in some cases high teens assists in games. I think that suggests that he's got point guard chops to him, and they want to use him on the ball. But that said, he's also got a ton of impact away from the ball as sort of this jitterbug shooter who you can run off of split actions and have him fly off of screens, and I think that's something that a guy like Jamal Shed could really help to unlock too, right? Whereas, right now they're pretty dependent on Barnes and Quickley being the two main creators for their offense. Jakob Poeltl does some stuff from the elbows. Kelly Olynyk does some stuff when he's on the floor, but right now it's Quickley and Barnes, and a lot of the creation burden is on them. If in the next few years, as the Quickley Barnes duo progresses and sort of matures into what the Raptors envision them being, if Jamal Shed can kind of step in and be a supplementary playmaker, I think that's huge. I think especially considering Immanuel Quickley struggles a little bit on the defensive end, especially at the point of attack. He's a good rotational defender. He's got good shot contesting, chops and things like that. But as a point of attack guy, Quickley's not amazing. I think one of my favorite things about the Shed draft pick is he in theory can fit in lineups with Immanuel Quickley. A reason I was say down on, for example, Isaiah Collier as a fit for the Raptors is I didn't think there was a fit there where he would ever be able to play in lineups with Immanuel Quickley. I didn't think it'd be tenable defensively or shooting wise. And we'll get to the shooting with Shed in a second, but I do think the defense and the passing and the table setting could really play in nicely to the Raptors offense, where they like to run a lot of off-ball stuff. It's not just Quickley and Scottie, right? They've got Gradey Dick and Jacoby Walter, two guys who figure to be movement shooters in the NBA. If you have a legit sort of table setting point guard who can pick those guys out, use rim pressure to create drive and kicks, things like that, I think Jamal Shed, if he's optimized, look, second round picks, who knows, right? They're always a crapshoot. We'll see if it sort of progresses the way it seems like it can with a guy like Shed. But if it all hits, I think that is a really nice archetype of player that the Raptors just don't have right now. And in the next 2-3 seasons, if Shed can kind of get his sea legs and the shot can come along a little bit, I think he fits in beautifully with what the Raptors are doing, and very well could see him running point for important minutes next to Quickley with Scottie Barnes also out there.
Well, I think so too, and I think what's interesting in looking at. So I got to be honest. First of all, you mentioned Jacoby Walter. I got to see Houston Baylor play this year. That kid was one of the most impressive kids I saw in all of college basketball. So
we'd love to hear that.
I'm really happy Jamal Shead gets to play with him as opposed to cover him anymore, to say the least. But when you talk about pairing up with Quickley and Scottie Barnes, I actually go to Shed's second to last year in college when he was the conference defensive player of the year and did a bunch of different things for Houston. But he played with first round picks Marcus Sasser and Jarris Walker, right? Sasser, the movement shooter, he's only about 6'2" himself, but does a lot of two guard things at 6'2". Walker, the kind of, we don't know what position he is, 6'7" guy, right? Like obviously it's a college version of that. And the Walker was a freshman, but his role in that sense was a lot of, like, he still got 10 points a game, still got about 4 rebounds, but he still had 5 assists in this incredibly slow pace again, where it's just, hey, we're going to run some version of a floppy set. We're going to get Jarris to the high post after we get the first action at it. Like, just some sort of a setup of a more rhythmic offense that ultimately led to those two guys getting to isolate a lot, right? If you're trying to get a catch and shooter during the shot, you get to isolate out of a Quickley or a Barnes. I do think Shed sets that kind of stuff up well too. And I actually, if your listeners are like, what games do I go watch? I'd say anything from that 2022-23 team. That's kind of the initial role I think of when I think of pairing with those guys. Now, I don't want to go through and be like, and then Tremont Mark is like Gradey Dick. And I'm not going through all different, but specifically with those two, I think that actually pairs up pretty well.
I like that. And so I guess we got to talk about the elephant in the room, right? It's the shooting, right? This is the thing in the modern NBA. If you're a guard who can't shoot, it's really hard to stay on the floor. It just is. And it was not the strength of Jamal Shed in college. He took a lot of them. He took about 4 per game the last 2 seasons and shot about 31% both years. That's a pretty decent sample size. And, you compare that to free throw shooting, very good. He shot 78% last season. He's had an 80% season there. There's some indicators on the touch. Obviously, the three-pointers are going to have to fall, especially catch and shoot stuff, right? When he's away from the ball, I'm not expecting him to come in and be, a Kyle Lowry level pull-up three-point shooter. That is the skill that makes point guards into stars. I'm not coming in expecting to see that from Jamal Shed, but if he can be someone who can move the ball as a table setter, relocate, knock down catch and shoots, I think that makes him an absolutely viable player when you mix in the rim pressure and the defense and the passing. And so how much do you believe in the shooting? Is there anything from his time with Houston that maybe sort of paints the numbers in a different direction? Obviously, as one of the key offensive players, he's probably getting a lot of very contested and difficult looks, probably a heavier pull-up diet than you'd like to see. Maybe the catch and shoots are a good enough thing for him to kind of focus on and lean into that he can actually be successful with it. What did you see in his shooting profile during his 4 years at Houston that maybe gives you optimism, or perhaps is like a little layer of skepticism that's going to click for him at the NBA level?
Well, and that's I mentioned the Fred VanVleet comparison earlier. I don't know that he'll ever be Fred VanVleet as far as a shooter goes. Yeah. Again, Houston Rockets guy. I got to see him shoot pretty well this year, right? I do think though that what encourages me about Jamal Shed is twofold. One, a lot of his threes, especially this year, were, as you're mentioning, off the bounce against the team's best perimeter defender, typically, right? And I don't think that that's his role at the NBA level, just because most people don't ever have, no matter who their guy is, a 6'1" guy doing that.
Sure.
Right. And the other thing I'll say too that was encouraging in a weird way, this might be discouraging to you, actually would be interested to hear your take, is there were games he'd go 4 for 5 and games he'd go 0 for 4. And that's how you average out to 31% or whatever, right? So his average is his average. But you wonder if, like, with more time on task, again, pro shooting coaches, pro workout schedule, pro regimen, doesn't have to go to algebra class. Like, with those things, do you maybe, you don't go 4 for 5 every night, but do you have more of those kinds of nights, or maybe not have the 0 for 4 nights and see that raised to a more, middle of the pack level for guys under 6'3"? Right. I maintain, I get why people would take a player over 6'3" in the NBA. I'm baffled that there were 4 or 5 players under 6'3" taken ahead of him. And I guess it does come down to the shooting aspect of this whole thing. And I think that does get to a respectable level with time.
Right. I mean, yeah, I think if that happens, the tools are there for a guy who has, at the very least, like a long-term backup point guard, like your classic dude who hangs around the league a while, plays for maybe a handful of teams. Maybe he becomes a long-term Raptor. We'll see. Everyone hoping for that, obviously. But like the stuff he does sort of on the margins. I mean, Raptors fans are partial to little things kings. Of course, Kyle Lowry may be the most prominent little things king in recent basketball history at that size. And if you can do that stuff to overcompensate for your size, that is a massive thing to help you kind of carve out a role and a niche in the NBA. Obviously, Parker, the thing that really pops when you watch him, the thing that I believe Sam Vecini said, it's the single best defensive tape he's ever seen from a guard. The defense is the thing with Jamal Shed. The highlights are frankly ridiculous and should go viral just as much as the garbage cleanup clip does. Let me ask you, just sort of wax poetic about Jamal Shed's defense at 6'1" as a guard. What is it that makes him so impressive? Do you have any in particular games that stand out, any possessions that stand out from his time with Houston that really kind of tell the tale of Jamal Shed, the defender?
Oh, like things that come to mind are he had a couple big time blocks when Houston played Texas A&M in the regular season this past season on what was the guard's name? Wade Taylor IV, who is electric in his own right. He had a series earlier in this past season against Utah in one of those around Thanksgiving tournament times where he has a steal, he flips it to his own guy, his guy turns over, he gets a steal right back. Like it's like it all in a matter of like 3 seconds. I think the thing that's just super impressive about watching him though is he's playing 38 minutes a night. And while we can pull together highlight clips and things like that, keeping up the defensive intensity for 94 feet for 38 minutes a night, it almost doesn't come across in a highlight clip in the same kind of way.
Right.
Really just tremendous ball pressure. There were, these are leaked reports, I'm sure, from his agent, right? But people saying like other point guards didn't want to work out with him for pro teams because they didn't want to have that on their resume.
Right.
His own combine stuff I enjoyed watching just to get to see him play one more time. And he's out there hounding guys from 94 feet at the combine, right? Like these guys are, or these kinds of moments just kind of came second nature to him. Zach Edey is 7'4" or whatever he is, right? That Jamal Shed knocks him out of Defensive Player of the Year at 6'1", right? The kind of defensive presence we're talking about doesn't even get into anyone clinging from UConn or any of these other big giants. That's not an award typically given to 6'1" guys. And I feel like it was a nice crowning achievement for him on 4 years of college basketball because that is what he got best known for over the course of the 4 years. He drove the Big 12 nuts. Ray J. Dennis has nightmares about this guy, right? I mean, you go to Houston and Max Absmith. Max Absmith has nightmares about this guy. Dalton Connect, the big Tennessee guy.
Right.
They just go back and watch his tape when he was in Northern Colorado, and Northern Colorado played Houston.
Right. Jamal
Shed held him to over. I mean, like these kinds of moments, like I can pull out a clip here and there, but these like stat lines just read like, oh man, so and so had a bad night shooting, or oh man, so and so must have had the flu, or so like. And I was like, no, they just had to play Jamal, and it honestly. So another Kelvin Sampsonism. He says 3 guys can't have bad days: your coach, your best player, and your point guard. And then he would also tag this last season that for Houston last year, those were the 2 of those were the same guy, right? And it really like does when he makes this diving on the floor play here, or he makes the steal there, or makes the big block at the end of the shot clock there, or the putback dunk in the tournament, or whatever. Those kinds of plays, at least for Houston, did have like they were worth more than 2 points. Like the momentum swings were valuable, and I think that translates. I think those guys typically find their ways on the NBA floors. Again, Houston guy here. Amen Thompson is a little bit taller, but obviously, like the things he brings to the table are those energy type plays. Jamal Shed does a lot of those things, man, and did them for 4 years. And so I really think that's where, your 6th man, your guy that comes in, and maybe when you're playing a smaller lineup or something, and he hustles. Like, again, when Houston needed him to, he'd guard the 6'4", 6'5", just because they needed some sort of a dog on that guy, and that was his role. As far as technical kind of stuff goes, I don't know what your audience feels like on technical stuff with basketball, but his hips are phenomenal. He flips his hips and beats guys. Like, it's so fluid that it's like he's just running a marathon, right? Like there's no change in direction. It doesn't feel like he's having to change direction because it's so quick. And that leads to beating guys' spots in frustrating ways over and over and over again. He does have a gambler's tendency. He goes for the steal, goes for the big block, but like that's also, again, those momentum shifting plays, right? That I think that's valuable too.
Feels like he's kind of earned that too, right? Like, the sort of benefit of the doubt. This is not Gary Trent Jr., whose kind of only thing was, well, I'm not very good at defense, but I can jump a passing lane. Like, this feels like he's got the basis of excellent defense, and he sprinkles in those gambles that are hard earned on top of that as well. Did you have anything last for me here to throw my way here, Parker? I feel like we've done a really good job of kind of getting Raptors fans teed up on Jamal Shed. If you have anything else for me for sort of the Houston fan perspective, please fire away.
So I want to make some sort of a joking comment about like, what is it with Toronto and small point guards? Didn't y'all have like the Kansas State kid on the G League team last year?
Yeah.
But honestly, what is it about Massai Ujiri and finding value? Because I think he also found value with others when I was trying to put together the roster around Jamal Shed, other picks in this draft. He seems to do a really good job of that. So what is it about Ujiri that would attract a guy like Shed? Because Shed didn't work out for the Raptors. He worked out at the combine, but didn't have an individual workout with them. And to my knowledge, I've never heard of any conversation between he and Ujiri before draft night, or draft day, I guess the second day. What's the organizational outlook on, because they find value, because I don't know they're getting a whole lot of free agents to Toronto otherwise.
Yeah. No, I think, look, it's been a bit of a fallow period for them developmentally the last few seasons. I think they've really paid a pretty hefty tax for winning the championship and all the sort of fallout that comes after that. And they had the weird Tampa season, and then this sort of wrench thrown into their plans with Scottie Barnes kind of falling into their laps, which I think threw them for a loop, frankly, for a little bit. And they weren't really sure what to do with, okay, we've got this thing that happened to us that's wonderful, but this roster is not maybe suited to them. How do we pivot out of this? And I don't think they did that necessarily gracefully, but all the way, they have still been a very good drafting team. The Scottie Barnes thing, they were dead right in saying, hey, we like him more than Jalen Suggs or Franz Wagner or whoever else could have been the 4th pick in that draft. I think they are going to be vindicated about that one for a very long time. I think Gradey Dick at 13, people kind of, scoffed at the pick a little bit. There are other guys on the board. And yeah, he wasn't great as a rookie, but I think they saw a sort of outlier skill set in him and the movement shooting he can bring to the table and said, hey, that's the thing we need on this team. That's the thing that fits Scottie Barnes. Let's nurture that. And I do think in general, their sort of one of their guiding principles over the years has been, getting dudes who are like dudes who want to work, dudes who like to sort of, hang out in the gym. I think, DeMar DeRozan, Norman Powell, Pascal Siakam, Kyle Lowry, Fred VanVleet, like they have a type for sure. These sort of grind set mindset guys, or if you, to not, if that, you look at that as a bad thing or not, but when it comes to making the NBA, that's a pretty good thing to have. And I think they believe in guys who do the work to sort of, foster development because of that work. I think that's been a pretty guiding principle for them for years. I think, even without the interviews, I'm sure there's plenty of exploits and scouting intel to be picked up on Jamal Shed and all he does that I think fits the sort of MO the Raptors like to go with when it comes to, identifying prospects they want to take. And yeah, I'm not surprised Jamal Shed is that kind of guy. And like you mentioned, the small point guard thing. Look, when you have Kyle Lowry in your team for as long as they did, as successful as they were with him, doing all of the things he did to make this a winning franchise, even before Kawhi Leonard ever came along, this was Kyle's team. I know some might look from the outside and say, "Ooh, this is DeMar's team." No, that was the Kyle Lowry Raptors for 9 years. And I think, not to say that Jamal Shed's going to go and be Kyle Lowry, but I think they're always going to be inclined to look for guys with that sort of dogged determination in their DNA. And I think Jamal Shed certainly ticks some of those boxes. We mentioned the Fred VanVleet similarities as well. I think that's kind of the thing is they look, yes, for good players, but they also look for good dudes and dudes who are going to work hard and who really want it. And I think that's probably why Jamal Shed is a Raptor today.
That and then he picks up trash after everyone's left the floor, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it all goes into the good dude thing, right?
All together, yeah.
100%. Parker, this was great, man. I feel like we can wrap it there. Thanks to all those tuning in who have not tuned into either of our shows before. Hi, thanks for being here. Subscribe, follow, rate, review, do all that good stuff. Much appreciated if you want to stick around and keep on listening. If you're a Cougs fan who wants to keep on listening to Jamal Shed get covered as his career gets rolling. If you are a Raptors fan who wants to tune in to hear what next Cougs are coming to the Raptors have this thing for the Big 12 now, apparently. So keep an eye out there.
We've got guys keep an eye on. We've got guys keep an eye on.
Perfect. You love to see that. Parker, anything in particular you want to plug?
No, just as a basketball fan, I'm going to be probably talking about Cougs in the summer league and stuff like that as well. And then, like I said, we really do have guys that have a shot at the league this time of year from now. So keep an eye on the Cougs if you're a Raptors fan.
Awesome, man. I always love, our college channel is fantastic top to bottom, but a lot of it is football first and foremost. When I can find a little hoops head, working on the college channel to talk to, I'm always very, very happy for that. So thanks for being here, man. And you can find Locked On Raptors wherever you get your podcast. Follow, subscribe, rate, review, tell a friend. Always appreciate it when you support all the Locked On shows and our work that's going out each and every day. And with that, we'll leave you there. Thank you so much for hanging out and listening to this crossover edition of Locked On Raptors and Locked On Cougs. Thanks for hanging. Bye-bye.
All right. Thanks again to Sean for helping break down the fit with the Raptors and just talking Jamal Shed. We'll talk about Jamal any and every chance we get here at Locked On Cougs. So thanks again to Sean for that. You can find him over at Locked On Raptors and all the things they're doing with Jamal Shed all season long. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Locked On Cougs is a proud member of the Locked On podcast. And is your team every day. Go Cougs.